Hello, everyone. Back. Thank you for coming back to another interview. I am excited because I am here with a dear friend of mine. Her name is Erin. She has been, amongst other things, to me, actually, and I don't know if I've actually ever told you this, Erin, but you have been kind of like a mentor to me in a lot of different areas of deconstruction of the bravery you display, of clarity, of helping get my voice out there, of teaching me my voice is valuable, all the way down the road. Had no idea I was going to say that, but there we go. So I'm excited you're here. Thank you for being here, Erin.
Thank you for having me. I'm always happy to be in your orbit.
Orbit. Awesome. Listen, for those that are watching, would you just take a moment and kind of introduce yourself?
Yes, my name is Erin Billings, and I am the host of the Touchy Subjects podcast. I am getting ready to start a nonprofit organization called Humans Over Institutions that will be launching this fall, and I'm so excited about it because faith deconstruction is one of the initiatives that we will be going heavy on. And the goal is to promote healing and awareness that the church has to change in order for people to feel safe there. So I'm really excited about the work that we're going to be doing, and I just can't wait to get started.
Well, that's exciting to hear because one of the main emphasis of this page is to provide an opportunity or space for people to find healing as well. And so I'm excited about what you're starting there. But would you kind of take us, give us a brief background? I know you could go all day because you have experiences that are crazy. Okay. But take us, give it, I mean, let me put it this way. Take a moment, if you would, and tell us a little bit about your religious background.
Well, I cut my teeth on the church pew. My mom is a
Literally.
pastor, literally. My grandfather's a pastor. I think at one point we counted about 26 pastors or church leaders in my family as far as first, second cousins, just that many in the first couple of rounds of family. I was raised Pentecostal, Church of God, Cleveland, Tennessee. Uh, I've literally been playing music in church since I was about 7 years old. I started playing on the worship team around 12. I went to performing arts school. I toured right out of college with Christian artists. I've worked with artists from American Idol, The Voice. I've worked with Grammy Award winners and Tony Award winners doing music, whether that is, just playing or orchestrating music. That's a lot of what I get hired to do now. I was a music director in churches of all sizes. In over the course of my career, I've been in over 1,000 churches just from touring. But then I was also working moonlighting as a church music director. And so I've worked in churches of 300, I've worked in churches of, 5 and 6,000 and up. I've worked in all sizes. I've worked in lots of different denominations, multi-ethnic, multi-generational. I've seen pretty much anything that you could see in church. And I've actually consulted churches on their audiovisual needs. So whether that be their sound, their media, their LED walls, their music, I go in and do clinics on their music. So I've literally seen pretty much anything that you could possibly see in the church industry. And let's just say that my world was rocked. And I'll tell you more about that later. But like I said, if it can be done in church, I've probably seen it or done it.
Yeah, I mean, and the thing is you've seen it from behind the scenes, right? So you know all of the good and the bad,
And the
right? As
other,
it comes through, right? Literally. Um,
literally.
for it. Now, you also, if it's okay to talk more about this, you went through some spiritual abuse.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah. Okay. Um, uh, when you went through the process and you were trying to heal from this, you started kind of calling it out, right? You made a mission not just to call out what happened to you, but what has happened to other people and the way in which the church handles it. You know, the travesties that the church commits and refuses to own up to, right? Could you take us through that process and how you found the courage to speak up and how you have continued to heal after calling it out?
Yes. The process, the process is healing.
Mm-hmm.
And the healing is the catalyst for everything else that's happening. I've known since I left the church, where I basically left it in a blaze of glory and lit the match, walked away, and the bomb went off. Because what happened was I called the church out. I was sexually harassed by 4 different pastors on staff at that church. I was sexually harassed at another church as well. And I knew the moment that I hired the lawyer to file the EEOC claim against them, I knew that this was basically the next phase of my life. At that point, I didn't even know that there was a term called deconstruction. But what I did know is that my life was in shambles, because when I lit that match and walked away from that church, I was walking away from my safety as far as my financial security. I was walking away from friends, and not just friends, but loved ones, people that I would actually consider to be my family. I'm that close to them. And then between the money and the relationships that I left behind, there's a part of me that still grieves my ministry.
Mm.
You know, in that particular church, my department, I had over 500 people in my department that I was the head of. And those people were like family. And not being able to be my own mouthpiece, there were lies and all these different things that happened as I left that church. And I had to pick up those pieces, and I had no idea where to start. So I would say, oh, by the way, I did not know how to control my emotions at this point in life. So I was literally a walking trauma response. So it took me a few years to realize really that, one, I was deconstructing. Once I realized that I was deconstructing, I'm like, what the hell do I do with this? And so in between that time, I worked another church job. That one didn't blow up in a blaze of glory, but what I realized while I was working there is that I was still in my trauma, and I was highly activated. The smallest thing would trigger me. And so when I left that church, that would have been in November of 2019, right before the pandemic, I made the decision, I am not going back to church until I heal. And even then, I don't know if I'm going to go back to church. So healing was the first priority. Is, you know, I cannot live in this walking trauma response world anymore. I have to get control of my emotions. At that time, I had no idea what nervous system regulation was, but my body was not safe in any way, shape, form, or fashion. And then the pandemic happened, and then nobody's safe. And so, you know, during that lockdown time, a lot of this is what I was working through, was like, okay, how do I heal? You know, I've always been taught that healing is like an instantaneous Benny Hinn service, where he takes his jacket and swings it around and everybody falls out in the spirit, and that's healing.
If
it's
only.
instantaneous. If only. And I realized, I'm like, everything that I've been taught about healing is not quite right. I mean, it's not wrong, but it's not right. And so from that point, I just kind of was like, okay, I'm not sure where to go from this. And the great thing, though, is that I remained open. You know, I knew that there were ways to heal, And so I just started researching. Something you'll learn about me is I could be a private investigator if I really wanted to be. I love researching, and I didn't go to the Bible, which is what my mother would have told me to do. I didn't find that to be a resource that I needed at the moment, which I have a minor in Bible. So I didn't, I've already, that ship has sailed. I'm like, okay, what have I not been allowed to look into while I was working in church, or while I was in Christian school and Christian college, or touring with Christian artists? What areas of spirituality have I kind of disregarded because it didn't fall in line with the word of God? And so I just started going down that rabbit hole, and I ended up meeting somebody online. Her name is Iwin. She was my first business coach. She is now my other podcast co-host. And we work together. But I started working with her, and she started introducing me to her friends. Now she's on the West Coast. She's not a Christian. And honestly, she became the best friend that I needed in that moment, because she was like, okay, so you left the church, release the golden handcuff, which I did, and let that go. Let's find what your new phase is going to be. And so when I did that, I started meeting all these different healers through her, because they're all her friends. The first one that I went to was Amanda Stedman, and she is a neuro-linguistic programming hypnotherapist. She's an award-winning author. The woman is brilliant. And I did one session with her, and I went from having panic attacks every day to not having them at all in one session.
Wow.
And I'm like, oh, snap.
But that's not biblical.
No. People being in, like, rewiring your subconscious mind, that's not in the Bible. But you know what? That was the first time that I met God, like, truly. And I'm Pentecostal. I was raised in a Pentecostal church. I can play shout music with the best of them. This was real and tangible. And I could see Jesus. I could see the angels. I could see all the colors. I could feel the difference in my body. And it was that moment that I'm like, okay, so there is a way to heal that is not a Benny Hinn church service, and where I don't have to like sow my first fruits to be able to get that healing, Sorry for the shade.
No, I totally hear you.
That's true though. But like, I can work with these people and heal my trauma and actually be able to function. Because up till that point, I was that walking trauma response. That after that session with Amanda, that was the first time that I had felt some relief. And so I just, from that moment, I'm like, okay, what else? What other areas of my trauma can I heal? And what modalities are going to support that healing the best? That's the process.
Right.
It's like, okay, what kind of trauma are we dealing with? Are we dealing with the trauma of getting a dick pic from your pastor? Okay, that's one of the first ones. That's like that first ripple. Like we've got to go look at that. Okay, what other trauma? I have childhood trauma. I was kidnapped as a child. So I need to heal my daddy issues. Beyond that, the spiritual narcissism. I've been gaslit and manipulated by so many different people. And that's more of the emotional abuse. And that's more of your self-worth and the imposter syndrome. You got to heal that part of your brain. And so I just started attacking all of the different areas in my life where I'm like, this needs work. Let me find a modality that will support this healing. And I've done it. So, like I said, the more narcissism, the gaslighting, the manipulation, the NLP really helped with that, because that helped me to turn off those voices that were replaying over and over and over again, telling me I wasn't worth anything, that I wasn't good at anything, that, you know, I'm not the expert that I think that I am, and all of that little inner critic noise. Shut up. Turn off, rewire your subconscious. And once I was able to do that, I could baby step my way towards, okay, now this is what I want to do. This is how I want this to look. And, you know, starting the podcast, I had to find my voice in that process.
Yeah.
And that's what the healing helped me do. It was like, okay, heal all these different areas of trauma. And then once those things are healing, that's when you start finding your voice. And so once you find your voice, then it's okay, how am I going to craft this message? Yeah. Because, you know, half of my audience are people just deconstructing. Half of my audience are church leaders. And I have to speak to both people, right, with the same amount of empathy and the same amount of passion to be able to get the point across. And so that's for me, that's what I've had to do, is just, okay, look at this from a logical perspective, and then also check that with your intuition.
Which,
and I've just done that.
Yeah, which I imagine was kind of difficult to check that with your intuition. One of the things I love, or a few things I love that you just said right there, is I think first and foremost, you chose you, right? I mean, like, you came out and say, hey, listen, life can't go on like this. This has to change, right? The next thing that I love is the fact that you looked at other alternatives that you were not allowed to look at before, right? I mean, like, he's like, okay, if I'm really to kind of get the full view of myself and understand what I'm going through and everything, that I've got to look outside the box the church has put me in, right? So when you did that, and when you found the courage to do that, how did those around you respond as you were going through these changes?
When I told my mom that I was deconstructing, I don't think she fully understood. She was supportive, but I don't think she got it. Now, I will tell you that my mom, the moment that I told her what had gone on with my pastors when I was working at the church in Kansas City, my mom hopped a flight and we found a lawyer.
Yeah,
Marcia, don't play.
You know, I know you have a lot of respect for your mom, and rightfully so. I think that's one of them right there. You know, knowing that you know, she chose you, right, instead of defending the church.
Yeah, the thing about my mom is she was raised very legalistically. The Church of God, whenever she was raised, you couldn't wear pants, you couldn't wear makeup, you had to have long hair. Women could not speak. So the fact that she's even an ordained pastor in that denomination, like, that for her, that's leaps and bounds, because she's like, I'm not letting these men tell me anything. That's you wonder where I get it from. It's my mother. But it took her a while to get there. And honestly, what I've noticed, so people in my orbit, for the most part, have been very accepting and very supportive. Now, if they have questions, that's where it can get a little hairy, because if it does not align with the word of God, then it can't be real. And that's,
imagine you had to go through because of all these other avenues you're looking to heal.
Yeah. And so when I tell my mom about these healings, that's what started opening her mind. Because I mean, I've worked with psychics, and my grandfather, who was a Church of God pastor, has come through. He's one of my spirit guides. And my grandfather gives me some of the best wisdom on how to heal my religious trauma. Like, how funny is that? And the thing is he says things in ways that only he said them when he was a pastor. Like, how weird is it that I'm talking to a psychic and they're quoting scripture to me from beyond the grave? Like, I can't make this shit up. And mom, you know, so I would call my mom and be like, so I just met with my psychic friend and Papa came through And I would give little context clues. And she was like, oh, well, how did you know about that? Because there were times where he would say something and it would be in reference, and I would have to go back to my mom and be like, what is this symbolism? There was a church that he was a pastor of whenever she was young, that there was a lot of demonic spirits and a lot of demonic activity that was going on in that church. And I didn't know the name of the church. And so I would go back to my mom and be like, what was Winfield like? What does Winfield have to do anything with anything? And she'd be like, oh, that's the church that we had the running demons. And just stuff like that. And she was like, how did you know about that? I was like, oh, well, I had a little conversation with Papa today. And she's like, oh,
I blew her mind.
yes, essentially. But the more that these things happened, the more normalized it became in my family, and for me to be able to talk about it. And so there was one lady who I had actually interviewed for my podcast, and she was a intuitive. And she sees me and she's like, we knew each other in a past life. And then she starts talking to me about my great grandmother. She's like, your great grandmother was a mystic. And she was like, and you have a lot of her gifts. And she starts talking about things. I've never told anybody that my great grandmother reached her hand into fire because the Lord told her to, and she grabbed coals out with her bare hand. I don't talk about these things like on a normal, like just publicly.
It's
And
not normal conversation.
yeah, exactly. Like, why would I tell you about my great grandmother? And this woman, the first time I meet her, she was like, yeah, so your great grandmother reached her hand and grabbed out hot coals, and she did all these things. She had such great faith, and you are just like her. And I'm like, what the just happened? Because I don't know this woman. And she's sitting there telling me these crazy things. And like, this is a normal occurrence in my life. So I had to go back to my family and be like, okay, so what did Nana Bradley do where the house fell down? Because I don't know that story. And then my great uncle will be like, oh, well, she wanted somebody to witness to. And so she prayed and the side of the house fell down. And then all of a sudden she had 50 people outside of her door and she got them all saved. This is the story of my life. And I'm like, what the hell is going on here? I can't make this up. But how I'm finding it through psychics, that's the funniest and most random and ironic of all of it. And so my mom and everybody really in my family, they started embracing it because they started seeing me heal and they started seeing the change. And then whenever my gifts started to come up, that's really when they're like, okay, so things are not the same as they once were. And that's a good thing. But I think it's healing by proxy.
Sure.
Because they're seeing that I'm doing the work and it's actually working. Well, what is it that they are disregarding? And so honestly, there's now some of them are starting to deconstruct, but they're doing it in a very healthy way. And they're becoming more open-minded, which that's all I want for the church, is to be more open-minded.
Sure.
So that's really, I mean, hope that answers your question.
No, that did. That was great. You'll never see me reach into a fire and grab coals, by the way. So
no,
this is crazy. It's awesome. So you are one of these awesome people that still has a faith. It may have shifted, obviously, from where it was before, but you still have it. A lot of my clientele struggle with the idea that they can still be spiritual or have faith because of the wounds of the church, right? So what is it? How did you, for lack of a better way, how did you endure and keep a faith through the many harms that the church imposed upon you? Like, what did that look like for you? How did you continue to have that spirituality or that belief?
I think for me, and I think this is different for everyone. Healing is a journey that is very unique. So what works for me may not work for everyone. But the one thing that kind of helped me in that transition is cutting cords with the church. Because I made a big differentiation between Jesus and the church. There's a reason that I'm naming my nonprofit Humans Over Institutions, because the church is an institution.
Yeah.
And it is a very unhealthy, toxic, narcissistic industry that needs a lot of healing itself. And so for me, I made the decision to cut the cords with the institution. And what did that look like? It was very hard, because I believe that like I said, I still kind of grieve my ministry in a lot of ways. And it's not necessarily because of being on stage or music, although like I've had to heal my relationship with music, because music can be one of the most triggering things, and like this is literally my livelihood. But cutting cords with the church allowed me to separate and differentiate between the teachings of Jesus and the teachings of the church. The more I could separate it, the more I could be like, okay, my issues are not with Jesus. I don't have any problems with Jesus. Me and Jesus are just like this. I'm great in that department. I fully believe in Jesus. I would consider myself to be more of a Christ follower than a Christian. And that's part of that differentiation. A Christian is a part of the institution, and I refuse to be a part of that anymore until they get their shit together. And that's for me, that's the line. And so when I cut the cords with the church, what that's doing is that's cutting off the energetic flow of it feeding off of my energy. And it stopped me giving my energy to it, because for so long I would get so angry. Like I still have a lot of righteous anger, but at that point it wasn't righteous. It was just pure anger, bitterness, resentment. And so I had to shift that into love. That was a really, really hard thing to do.
Yeah.
So with that, cutting the cords allowed me to sever the toxic nature of it and basically call the pieces of me back. Because that's the whole point of cutting cords. You know, a lot of people talk about cutting cords in relationships, and you want to send the cord back to them with love, and you want your cord to come back to you with love, and you want to call all of the pieces of you back from whatever it is that you're severing ties with, and then you want to send the pieces of it back to itself with love. That's the whole premise of cutting cords. And for me, what I've been able to do because of that is I can see, actually, it's really funny. The more I heal, the more I'm able to access the part of my brain that worked in church. So I'm able to take the successful things from my ministry and then like implement them into my business. And so once I started to making those connections of like, okay, this is healing because now I'm able to access this old part of me, that's huge. And so cutting cords, I think, is one of the most valuable things that you can do whenever you're deconstructing, so that you can make that separation. And for me, I chose to keep my faith. I just altered it a little bit.
Okay, so you mentioned something, a lot of interesting things, but something that kind of caught my attention. You mentioned about the church getting their shit together, right? In your opinion, in your thought, knowing that you are starting this new nonprofit, what would it take for the church to get their act together, in your opinion?
What I'm starting to see, because as I'm building out this nonprofit, I'm building a team of pastors. And I'm being very strategic with this, because if the pastor is going to be a bigot, I do not want their name anywhere near mine.
Right.
And so I'm being very strategic. I'm working with these pastors to build out. The first thing is going to be more of a curriculum. The next thing is going to be a methodology that hopefully churches can install systems into their church where they're trauma informed. That's the first thing, because the church does not really have, most pastors that go to Bible college or that go to seminary do not have any trauma informed training. That's the first thing that it needs.
I never got any. Yeah.
Like, and neither has my mom, neither, like most people that I know, unless they have a doctorate and then they go and try to get that trauma informed certification, there's no trauma education for pastors. And in this day and age, you have to be trauma aware at bare minimum. Yep. So the first thing is the church needs trauma informed systems for reporting. I get contacted all the time about how to handle a pastor that does not report abuse in the home, like sexual abuse. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I get contacted about that kind of thing. And unfortunately, it's not mandated for every state.
Yeah, it depends on state.
And so that's another big issue for me, because I don't want to see kids in harm's way. And if you can do something to prevent that for a child, by all means, you should be doing it, not caring about whatever drama it's going to cause within a family. Just my personal opinion, but again, I prioritize humans over institutions. And so for me, you know, trauma-informed systems is one thing. For the church to get its shit together, they've got to be open and aware to the fact that they have caused harm. So what happens when a church leader causes harm? How is that handled? That's something that I want to approach and tackle. The other thing is that the church is all about control. And I know that the institution is not going to just relinquish control, but if you can get pastors that see the need for all of this, to band together and be like, you know what, I want to create a safe space in my church for people to ask questions, for people to unpack their learned beliefs, or to get help for their trauma, or, you know, if somebody needs to make a complaint about abuse or something, like, they need to be safe. And so basically creating this safe space and installing it into churches, I do believe that this is going to make a big difference in not just the church, but in the lives of the people attending it. Because, you know what, had I known that there was a counseling program in the church that I worked at, I probably would have gone and gotten help.
Mm-hmm.
I tried that, but the counseling system reported directly to the pastor.
Oh.
At the church that I worked at. And so anytime I would asked for help, I would get in trouble. And so I just learned, you don't ask for help. Well, if my whole thing is that the church has to be held accountable. So if you're going to be a part of this fellowship, a part of this methodology, you've got to be able to subject yourself to that authority, knowing that we are here to advocate for the human. Mm-hmm. And so, I mean, this is going to take years to build. I am not going to be able to produce this overnight. I'm very well aware of this, but I can already see the trajectory of change that can happen if even just trauma-informed systems get put in place. That's the first thing. And if that happens, that's going to make life better for a lot of people. But then being a resource for healing. Like, I have all of these connections. If you want EMDR, I've got EMDR people. If you want NLP, I've got NLP people. If you need a curse lifted off of you, I got those people too. Been there, done that, bought the t-shirt. So, you know, that it's just being a resource for people to find things to help them heal. And then installing that into a church.
Mhm.
I mean, imagine if when you were in the thick of your situation, if you would have known that there was a safe space in that church to go to, how would have things changed?
Yeah. Yeah. And you're
So,
right. I mean, the fact of the matter is, right now, in the majority of churches, there is no such thing as a safe space.
exactly.
And you seek outside, and even when you seek outside, the church tries to dictate who you see outside.
Yes. And that's where, if they can relinquish that part of their control, which I think the younger pastors, the ones that see the need for this,
Mhm.
they're willing to do that because they actually, a lot of these younger pastors actually give a damn about their congregation. Who would have thought?
Yeah.
And so that's, for me, it's aligning myself with those people and trying to make change in tangible ways where people can actually feel it.
Yeah.
That's the goal. um and if I can make one church safer, think about the ripple effect that's going to happen.
I love it. I am excited that you are doing that. And you're right, it's going to take years, but I know you're very strategic, and you think through all angles. So I'm looking forward to seeing this take shape.
I'm
Totally.
gonna need your help.
I will do whatever you need me to do.
We'll talk about that later, but yeah, no,
Okay.
that's it's gonna be an all hands on deck, because getting pastors to even be willing to sit across the table from somebody that believes differently from them,
Mm.
that's a task.
Yeah, that's hard.
And it's taking a lot of wrangling on. Luckily, who knew it, I had people skills. Like I've been able to get, like, and that's more of the thing, is like, I think the more that I heal, the more people are like, she's on to something.
Yeah.
And so, if I can, it's all about the ripple effect right now. If I can change one person's life, then I can change 10, then I can change 100, then 1,000, and it just grows exponentially.
You mentioned people skills, um, which leads me to my next question for you. By the way, that was a fantastic answer. Um, the you have an incredible podcast. Okay. Um, it's widely recognized, it's top charts, I mean, it's outstanding. You're very professional at what you do. Give us an idea of, like, where's this year going for you, in podcast land? Like, what is your main focus?
So, okay, so I had to take a long hiatus off from the podcast to really get clarity and direction. I've known that this is the direction that I was headed for years. I just didn't know how to get there. I knew, and that's kind of the thing about the way that my human design manifests, is like, it's really non-specific. So it's just like, you're supposed to follow the random intuitive nudges that you get. And so, like, the more I've operated within my human design, I don't know if you're familiar with human design, but it's like, it's my jam, because I've literally adopted it into my living. And the more I follow it, the more it's like, oh, okay, this makes sense. And I like it. For me, I had to take a big long break, because I did that episode with you, to the pastors that caused me trauma. I feel like that was the episode heard worldwide,
Which,
probably because of what I
anybody
named.
has not heard that, you need to go listen to that episode, because she knocks it out of the park.
Thank you. You did too. And so it's one of those, from that moment when I basically outed the church, my nervous system went into freeze.
Hmm.
And I could not find my footing, because I'm like, okay, this is the next level of healing this.
Mm-hmm.
It's out in the open. It actually ended up healing a relationship with one of my closest friends in the world. That episode actually healed that relationship. And I think my nervous system was just so out of whack.
Yeah.
That I just had to take that break and be like, okay, what areas are next on the healing list? And so I couldn't tell people, okay, I'll be back in 2 months. I tried that. It didn't work because my body was not ready. And so I made the decision, I'm not going to go back to the podcast until I get clearance through my nervous system and clearance from above that, okay, this is the direction you're heading. And about 3 months ago is really when I started getting the nudge of it's time. And here's the problem. And of course, podcasting is what I do for a living. I actually teach people how to podcast. And so part of me from the business and logical brain side is like, you're losing your audience. You're losing, like, your metrics are going to go down. You're going to lose half of your listeners, all these different things. You're already off the charts because you've taken off so much time, all these different things. That's the inner critic part of my mind that I had to be like, you know what, F you, I'm going to do this in my own time.
Right.
And so I started getting that intuitive nudge. And I think this is around the time when it's like, no, you're going to start a nonprofit. And actually, it was people asking me to start a nonprofit. How that even started is a funny story in and of itself. But I'm like, okay, if I'm going to start this nonprofit, I have to build my audience. And where I really feel like I'm headed in this moment is towards, I kept hearing the words, I'm clairauditory. And so either songs will come to me or words, just random words. And I think I texted you the day that the word came to me was healthy church. I kept hearing the words healthy church. And I'm like, what the fuck? Why am I like, at this point, it wasn't clear to me, but I just kept hearing healthy church. And I'm like, why are you in my head? And about a week later, the words meet them where they are, not where you want them to be, came. And I'm like, fuck. This is the literal real time what I was feeling and what I was thinking and what I was saying in that moment. It was like, what do you mean meet them where they are? I don't want to go back to church. I'm not ready to go back to church. But this is what was coming to me. And I'm like, okay, what does this mean? And so I started unpacking it. And literally in 2 days worth of time, I had planned out an entire series for my podcast. Because what I realized in that moment was you are being called to help the church heal. And it, like, literally as I'm saying this right now, I feel like I'm going to throw up because I know that this is a massive undertaking. Yeah. I know that in the last answer, if you're listening to this, you're probably thinking, she's out of her goddamn mind. Because how do you heal an institution that is so toxic and broken? Like the audacity that I must have to think that I can do this. Like, this is really, like, this is what makes me sick to my stomach. But also, I know that my dreams and my calling is so much bigger than this pit in my stomach. And generally, the moments where you have a pit in your stomach is where you're supposed to run towards that thing. And so I within 2 days, I had a full seasonal arc planned out. And when I tell you that, like, not very many people know about the nonprofit yet. I'm not launching it until I'm filing the paperwork on Tuesday of next week. So my mom's coming down this weekend and she's going to help me with the articles of incorporation for the nonprofit. And so, you know, it's not really public knowledge as of right now. I don't mind telling you guys, but
well, this isn't launching till the September 4th, so you're good.
Perfect. So by then it should be public. But for me, it was one of those, okay, how can I start getting church leaders to understand where those of us that have been deconstructing are? How can I speak in their language? Because again, the words that I heard so clearly was meet them where they are, not where you want them to be. So I'm sitting here thinking, okay, those of us that have been deconstructing, what is it that we want to say to these church leaders? Mm-hmm. So like the most recent episode that I have out is on spiritual bypassing. Mm. What I want to say through this is stop fucking spiritually bypassing people. Like just stop. And so much of that is oral tradition passed down because it's just the way people talk.
Yep.
And I've had to train my own family in this. Mm-hmm. And so having that conversation with Tay and Brooke, I'm like, okay, what is it that these people need to hear? The people that are deconstructing, that have experienced spiritual bypassing on a deep level, what do they need to hear? And then what do the church leaders need to hear so that they stop doing it? So that's where I'm coming at with this podcast. The next episode is on how our religious trauma affects the body. That's the episode that's coming out this weekend. Great. And this, I talked to a nervous system regulation expert. I talked to a nurse practitioner who works literally in the psych ward. Both of them are deconstructed. And so talking to them about how our trauma affects our body. My religious trauma literally fried out the ends of my nerves. I was told this by a medical medium who also pulled a curse off of me because a pastor of one of the churches that I reported for sexual harassment put a curse on me.
What a stand-up guy.
Don't you know it? But, the fact that curse can be lifted, that's a miracle in and of itself. But then knowing how to talk to these people about trauma, how to talk to them about, so that's the lens that I'm going through for this entire season is, okay, what do the church leaders need to hear? And then what do the people that are deconstructing need to hear? Because they want to hear basically me give the church the business. They want some kind of justice. Uh-huh. And if they can hear a pastor say, you know what, yeah, change needs to be made, that's going to make them feel better. And that's also going to make the church leader sit there and think, you know what, she's right. Change needs to be made. So I'm walking a tightrope here.
Well, I'm loving it. I've been listening to your episodes this year. For anybody that isn't a Let's Talk Touchy Subjects podcast, it's outstanding. It really does broaden your understanding. It challenges your regular traditional thinking. It kind of opens your eyes to a lot of things. So I personally think you're balancing that tightrope really well. And I'm looking forward to the next one coming out. So with that being said, if someone is quietly going through the deconstruction process, maybe they don't feel safe in being open about it or anything like that, what words of advice would you give them?
Heal. Prioritize your healing first. Everything else will come into place. Like I said before, in my own healing journey, I couldn't find my voice until I healed. I couldn't stand up to the people in the right way until I healed and got rid of the anger, bitterness, and frustration and resentment. Don't get me wrong, I'm still bitter and angry, and I'm fueling that into my advocacy work because it's righteous anger. I have a right to be angry about this.
Yeah.
But how are we channeling that anger? That's something that I see a lot in the deconstruction community is so much anger. And it is deserved. You have every right to feel that way. But as you heal, you're going to see that anger morph into love. And you're going to be much more open. It's literally a personal development journey. Yeah. And this doesn't have to have anything to do with business. This can just be your own personhood. But the more you heal, you're going to see it impact every single area of your life. But it all starts with the healing.
Very true. I don't think that you could embark upon this new adventure if you hadn't taken all this time to heal, right? It would look completely different. So for those that are listening, your healing journey is the most important thing.
And having a support like what you're offering through your membership, that is the best thing, is to be in community with people, like, and not to sound churchy, but essentially whenever you lose the church community that we've all been raised with, that we've all, you know, just we've embodied, and we've basically are thrown ourselves into that environment, we have to replace that. And so a space like this is the perfect place for you to replace it, because you're meeting other people that are in the same boat as you are. And then you're working with somebody like Brad who can help you to move forward and not tell you where to land.
Yeah, it's true. That's true. Thank you for that. Listen, as we close, what's the best way for people to follow your journey, support you, get behind your movement, everything? What's the best way for them to do that?
Follow my Touchy Subjects account. It's Let's Talk Touchy Subjects. The podcast is Touchy Subjects Podcast. You can find me on Facebook. My name is Erin Billings. Basically, on any of those three places, you will find me, because on the podcast, you can go to the show notes. There's going to be more coming, because like I said, I'm launching a nonprofit. I think I'm probably going to announce it in the next week, but it's not going to have its public-facing assets for a little while. But that's okay. Have to have the paperwork in first before I go launching websites and all those kinds of things that come along with it. But you know, keep an eye out for humans over institutions, because I have a feeling this is going to fly. All of the doors are opening so magically right now that I'm like, yeah, this is gonna work. This is gonna be good. And you know, if you ever need a resource, feel free to inbox me. I'm full of connections. And once we have the website up for the nonprofit, we're going to be that's going to be a part of our service, is basically have a directory of healers and professionals that you can work with to help your trauma.
Awesome. Well, listen, just in case, you know, as you will find out when you scroll down underneath her bio, you will find links to her sites and everything she does. So feel free to click on any of those. It'll take you directly to her. I cannot thank you enough. You know, I respect the hell out of you. I respect the journey you've been on, the healing process. I love the fact that you have taken the time and continue to take the time to prioritize yourself and your healing. And that's allowed you to be able to look outward and say, okay, now how can I help others with that healing? And so you bring obviously a tremendous amount of knowledge and wisdom into this forum. So thank you for taking the time to be on this episode. Thank you for sharing with our audience here, all of us, your wisdom and insight. And I know there's a ton that we haven't touched on. So what I'll probably do, if it's okay with you, I'll also include down below other interviews that you and I have had, to where they can hear even more of your story. I actually keep those, so you never know when you need them, right? So feel free, for those that are watching, to go and watch some other interviews that Erin and I have had, and hear her full story. So thank you again, Erin. I'm excited about what the future has for you, and also for those that are going to be healed through your nonprofit and through your podcast and all that you're doing. Thank you for having me, and I'm always happy to be a part of anything you do, because I know that you've got the right heart. I hope so. And I love working with people like that, because it's rare. Well, thank you. Thank you everyone for joining us. If you have any questions, concerns, snide remarks, whatever have you, feel free to DM me or comment to me, as well as you heard, her DMs are open if you need any more advice or possible connections. So with that, we're going to sign off, but thank you again, Erin, and look forward to talking to you again soon.
Thank you.